So we've seen that punishment can work if done immediately and every time they do the behavior and going straight to an intense enough stimulus that's also not too extreme. But there are some side effects or limitations of punishment that are important to take into account when we're considering it as a way to change behavior, a way to create learning. So first off, poorly administered punishment tends to suppress the behavior only temporarily. For example, if mild punishment does lower the behavior, it's almost always a short-lived change that goes away. But permanence is possible, and it's more likely when we follow those effectiveness rules we talked about. Perhaps a bigger issue, though, is that punishment is often very difficult. It's hard to do positive punishment effectively in practice. It's hard, sometimes impossible, to follow all those rules. Like, you can't be consistent if you aren't always around to do the punishing. You can't always react fast enough to get immediacy. Data shows we humans often tend towards mild or slowly increasing punishments, which we know is counterproductive. So often, even though punishment could work, we don't do it in a way that does work. And there are some bigger problems lurking here too. For one thing, research shows that being punished often, it makes the recipient, the one being punished, more aggressive. Basically, pain and frustration can reflexively make us lash out. We take it out on others. For example, in animal studies, they've put two conspecifics, two animals of the same species, into a room together, and then they apply a punishment shock to the behaviors of one of the animals. Basically, they set up a punishment contingency using a shock for just one of the animals. And they've done this for rats, for monkeys, regardless. The more an individual is punished with shocks, the more they attack the other animal, even though the other animal didn't cause it in any way. In a sense, just receiving positive punishment can kind of make you a jerk as you take it out on others. And it gets worse, because punishment also tends to make the one doing the punishing more aggressive in the future. Some people find this intuitive and some don't, but I want to make it really explicit and kind of obvious why this happens. Think about the behavior of the punisher, like the behavior of the really shitty dog owner who beats his dog for barking. It might temporarily make the dog be quiet, which means that beating behavior in the moment removed an annoying stimulus from that jerk's environment. It worked in some short-term sense. That means the guy's beating behavior is negatively reinforced. The use of punishment itself, the behavior of doing the punishing, that is negatively reinforced, making the person more likely to use such punishment behaviors in the future because it temporarily relieved the situation, right? The dog's barking or the child's questioning or the other drunkard's insults or whatever. And it gets worse because often, especially for kids or for animals who don't have language skills, the recipient of the punishment may not actually recognize the contingency between their behavior and the punishment that you're doing, making it less likely the punishment will actually work and affect the behavior in the long run. Like, animals and small children may not understand why you're yelling at them or spanking them. For example, you want them to think mommy's mad because I did this bad thing, so I better not do it again. But they might be thinking, mommy is mean right now, I better shut up or cry or cower or freeze or run away. But that ends up, being negative reinforcement for their freezing or crying or running away from mommy behaviors, making those behaviors more likely in the future rather than punishing the original bad behavior, which they might not even be connecting with how you're acting right now. They might not realize, right? So it may just make them more withdrawn around mom in general in the future. Your attempt to punish one behavior might instead reinforce other unhealthy behaviors or an unhealthy relationship and associations in general. And there's more, because as we saw with punishment that is, too extremely intense, punishment may sometimes decrease all behaviors, not just the one you want decreased. And this doesn't just happen from using an extreme level of shock or an extreme level of yelling or something. Often, it's hard to know ahead of time what intensity of a punishment will be effective. Imagine like a middle school teacher who wants to decrease talking out of class or talking out of turn during class. So he decides to punish kids who talk out of turn by belittling them when they do, right? Does that work to decrease the talking out of turn behavior? Maybe, maybe not, depends, right? But it means it also might, right? It might do that, but it also might mean soon those kids don't speak out in class at all. They don't participate at all. Maybe for the rest of their school career, right? Oops, the teacher tried to punish one behavior, but ended up decreasing a bunch of other behaviors. That would be an unwanted side effect of that punishment. Also, punishment often causes an effect called social disruption. Think of this like disrupting the social bond between the punisher and the punished. Social disruption means the person delivering the punishment and or the setting where the punishment happened can themselves become conditioned aversive stimuli. In other words, the recipient may come to fear the one doing the punishing, as well as or instead of the punishment itself, or may come to fear the place the punishment happened. This symbol here, by the way, this S with an AVE after it, that's the same S we usually use for stimulus. I've just added the AVE as a superscript that's short for aversive. So we're saying a stimulus that's aversive, a stimulus that's bad, that's unwanted, right? So like the parent that did the punishing might become a stimulus, which is aversive, which is feared or disliked. That's social disruption. For example, kids punished in class may start to avoid the classroom or avoid the teacher in general by skipping class or maybe just being silent in class and not participating. Or the spanked dog may start to just fear or avoid the owner, right? There's a disruption of that social bond there. Thankfully, there is a way to minimize social disruption if you do have to use punishment. So the effect can be reduced if the one doing the punishing also uses reinforcement for appropriate behavior. So don't worry, parents. You're not automatically going to become an aversive stimulus to your kid, at least not until those teenage years, as long as you're also providing reinforcement for healthy behaviors, like giving love and praise for doing what they should be doing. Lastly, just a note about some research into corporal punishment, like physical positive punishment. Studies show that children who are physically punished tend to use the same method of punishment when trying to control the behavior of other children. Like little kids who get spanked will try to use spanking to change the behavior of their schoolmates. A boy who gets beat by his father is more likely to use physical fighting to resolve conflicts at school. Also, there is a strong correlation between parental use of punishment and overall aggression levels in children. Also, there's a correlation between kids receiving frequent or harsh punishment and later being diagnosed with depression and anxiety and conditions like that. That said, as always, beware the limitations of correlational evidence, right? For ethical reasons, proper experimental designs in humans with good external and internal validity, those are much harder to do with something like positive punishment. So causation isn't proven here. It's not necessarily known, but let's just say it's very strongly hinted at with lots of evidence. All right. To wrap this one up, I just wanted to point to some work by Paul Alberto and Anne Troutman, where they described a sort of suggested hierarchy of procedures we might use to suppress or eliminate undesired behaviors, just based on all the work they'd reviewed on each of these procedures. Basically, they ended up setting up a hierarchy that ranges from like the most socially acceptable, I might call level 1, to the least socially acceptable, call level 4, what you'd kind of do as a backup. So level 1 is differential reinforcement procedures, the DRO, DRI, DRA, those things. Level 2, the next best thing would be non-reinforcement procedures like extinction. After that, level 3, negative punishment procedures like response cost and timeout. Those are just ways of doing negative punishment, right? So it might be like timeout would be if they do the behavior, you put them in timeout, like they can't do anything, for a while. They can't do anything fun or earn any rewards or things like that for a while. That's timeout. That's a type of negative punishment. And then level 4, positive punishment, like we've talked about, spanking, things like that. So in practice, this means rather than yelling at your puppy for peeing indoors, which would be positive punishment, you could aim for a level 1 procedure first. Bring treats on walks and reward the puppy every time it pees outside. What you're doing is differentially reinforcing behavior B, which has a side effect of decreasing behavior A, decreasing the peeing inside behavior. Specifically, this would be a DRI, a differential reinforcement of incompatible behavior. Because if they're peeing outside, they won't have the full bladder to be able to pee inside. All right. For now, we'll stop there for punishment. In the next video, we're going to turn to a different type of aversive conditioning, a different type of learning that in some way it involves something aversive, but in this case, we'll be talking about a form of reinforcement. We'll be talking about negative reinforcement to help us get away from aversive things.